Hey guys, today we're stepping back in time to a place where the earth is rich with stories, myths, and legends. Imagine walking through a vast, sun-baked land, the air thick with the scent of eucalyptus and the rustle of ancient trees. Above you, the sky is impossibly blue, and you can almost feel the weight of the centuries pressing in from every direction. The Aboriginal Dreamtime is not just a myth. It's the very fabric of existence, where everything around you, from the rocks beneath your feet to the birds in the sky, holds a story. But here's the thing, you probably won't survive this if you aren't prepared to embrace the strange and wild. Dreamtime is full of bizarre characters, powerful spirits, and weird creatures that might just have you questioning your very existence. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from, your location and local time, if you feel like sharing. It's always fun to know where everyone's tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As we begin, let's talk about Dreamtime and how it came to be the stories that have been told for tens of thousands of years. These aren't your regular bedtime stories. They are the very foundation of Aboriginal culture. Dreamtime isn't just a moment in time. It's an ever-present part of reality. It's the past, the present, and the future all happening at once. Before the first settlers arrived, these stories were passed down orally, told by firelight under the wide, star-strewn sky. But soon, things started to get complicated. You see, when different groups of people began to invade and settle the land, they brought their own ideas, their own myths, and their own agendas. What would the Aboriginal people do when faced with these awkward neighbors, whose very existence challenged the very fabric of their traditions? As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the land, the Dreamtime stories had already been alive for millennia. But then came the first whispers of outsiders, tribes from neighboring lands, distant traders, and eventually, the European explorers. At first, these new faces were nothing more than a curiosity. However, as time passed, the awkwardness of having these neighbors in the land of Dreamtime started to feel more like a reality check. Imagine this. You're sitting by the fire, retelling a story about Baim, the Sky Father, when a stranger interrupts with a question about your ancestors. They don't understand your sacred land or your beliefs. They only see something foreign, something they can't grasp. The Dreamtime was no longer just something for your people. It became a battleground of beliefs, a clash of worlds. The stories you held close started to be questioned, ridiculed, or ignored. Historians still argue whether Aboriginal groups were completely isolated before the arrival of these outsiders. Some suggest that Aboriginal tribes were far more interconnected than we initially thought, exchanging stories, goods, and ideas long before European settlement. This gives rise to the question, did Dreamtime survive because of its adaptability, or was it simply too deep-rooted to be uprooted by a few awkward neighbors? On the flip side, there's the less discussed reality. How did Aboriginal people respond to outsiders in their land? Especially when the neighbors came with more than just curiosity. They brought with them disease, violence, and colonization. The survival of Dreamtime stories wasn't just about preserving culture. It was about survival in the face of this new, aggressive world. You might be wondering how stories could survive something as monumental as colonization. Well, here's the secret. Dreamtime was never meant to be contained within the pages of a book or trapped in one version. These stories, always told in a living, breathing way, could bend and shape to adapt to whatever was thrown their way. It's kind of like when you're making a stew, you throw a bunch of random ingredients together, and it still somehow works. Dreamtime had the same ability to take on new flavors without losing its essence. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves. This clash wasn't just about outsiders bringing new myths into the mix. It was also about how Dreamtime began to absorb them, stretching to include ideas, influences, and new perceptions of the world. Still, the question lingers, how did the Dreamtime, so intertwined with Aboriginal identity, continue to thrive with all these awkward neighbors hanging around? In the midst of all these shifting dynamics, something extraordinary happened. Dreamtime adapted. While the outside world moved in, Dreamtime didn't wither away or get buried under foreign tales. It bent and reshaped itself. Imagine it like this. You're sitting around a fire, telling the story of the great rainbow serpent, the one who carved out the rivers with its massive body, when someone suggests it's just a giant snake in the sky. Instead of defending it as something sacred, the storyteller nods and says, maybe it is, but it also controls the rain, the rivers, the life of the land. Without it, this place wouldn't exist as it does. The outsider might not fully understand, but they see the power of the story nonetheless. This flexibility, this survival mechanism, allowed Dreamtime stories to endure through colonization and beyond. Even when faced with the white man's more rational view of the world, Dreamtime held its ground. Historians still debate whether the spiritual narratives of Dreamtime were able to withstand external forces because of their malleability or because they were so deeply ingrained in the cultural consciousness that they became untouchable, like a sacred pattern woven into the fabric of the land itself. Take, for instance, the arrival of missionaries in the 19th century. They were armed with Bibles and a belief in their divine purpose, but they didn't know the land, its rhythms, or its stories. Dreamtime wasn't something they could convert or stamp out with a few harsh words and prayers. They tried, of course. They tried to replace the stories of Ba'im, Duramulum, and the other celestial beings with the teachings of Christ. They even labeled the Aboriginal people as heathens for clinging to their beliefs. But the Dreamtime stories had already survived thousands of years. They had withstood the shifting of the earth, the rise and fall of entire civilizations. How could a few zealous foreigners hope to erase what had been so firmly rooted? And then there was the storytelling itself, the secret, sacred nature of it. Elders passed the stories down to select individuals, each one becoming a steward of the Dreamtime. The very act of storytelling was not just an oral tradition, it was a performance, a living act of cultural preservation. Through dances, songs, and intricate rituals, Dreamtime stories were kept alive, even when outsiders tried to interfere. Those who understood the true significance of these stories whispered them in the quiet of the night, protected from the eyes of the unfamiliar. But let's be real, not every outsider saw Dreamtime with the same respect. Some laughed it off, others feared it, and some tried to understand, but they never truly could. Yet through it all, Dreamtime never stopped evolving. It adapted, like an ancient organism that knows how to survive no matter the environment. But how exactly did it manage to survive when the entire fabric of Aboriginal life was under siege? As the centuries passed, Dreamtime became more than just stories. It became a force of cultural resilience. For Aboriginal people, the land wasn't just a backdrop for life. It was the stage, the actors, and the script, all rolled into one. The stories were like a map, a set of instructions on how to live in harmony with the earth, how to avoid danger, and how to honor the spirits who still walked among them. When colonization struck, it wasn't just a physical takeover of land. It was an assault on the very essence of what kept Aboriginal people connected to their culture. You see, Dreamtime wasn't confined to stories around a fire. It was embedded in the landscape itself. Every rock, every tree, every river had its own story. In fact, historians still argue about the extent to which Aboriginal people viewed the land as a living entity. Some say it was more spiritual, while others believe it was a deeply rooted physical connection. Regardless, the land itself was a direct reflection of Dreamtime. But then, things started to change. The arrival of European settlers brought the complete opposite worldview. They saw the land as something to be conquered, something to be worked and transformed. They viewed the stories as mere myths, something quaint, perhaps, but not real in the way they understood reality. So, when the Europeans started tearing through the land to build their settlements, it felt like an assault on the very stories that kept the Dreamtime alive. The trees weren't just trees anymore. They were lumber. The rivers weren't spirits, they were just watercourses to be dammed. But somehow, Dreamtime stories held their ground. They had become more than just stories, they were a way of understanding the world. And in the face of an aggressive colonization that sought to stamp out these ancient beliefs, Dreamtime shifted to survive. It began to blend, incorporate, and reframe itself to remain relevant, but not in a way that erased its true identity. It adapted by taking on new forms, blending stories with the language and influences of the newcomers. Take, for instance, how Aboriginal stories began to intersect with European religious teachings. Aboriginal people, especially in the later 19th and early 20th centuries, started drawing parallels between their Dreamtime and Christian beliefs. They didn't abandon their stories, but they found ways to coexist with new worldviews. The concept of Baiame as a creator figure, for example, was reimagined as somewhat akin to the Christian God in some of these interpretations. Of course, this didn't sit well with everyone. Some Aboriginal people resisted, feeling that their stories should remain untouched by foreign influence. Others embraced the opportunity to create bridges, finding new ways to preserve Dreamtime while interacting with the outside world. The flexibility of Dreamtime allowed it to bend without breaking, and in doing so, it survived. Yet, despite this adaptability, there were still those who saw the stories as mere fiction, no better than fairy tales. And when new myths were introduced, sometimes these were taken more seriously than the ancient tales of the land. But here's the thing, even when outsiders laughed at or dismissed Dreamtime, they could never truly erase it. The stories had become part of the land itself. Even if the land was covered with buildings and roads, Dreamtime had roots so deep that they could never fully be pulled out. But what was it about these stories that allowed them to be so resilient, even in the face of overwhelming odds? As the Dreamtime stories began to evolve in the face of colonization and foreign influence, one thing became clear. The storytellers, the elders who had long held the key to these ancient tales, were the true guardians of culture. They weren't just passing down stories, they were preserving the very soul of their people. Imagine, for a moment, sitting in the presence of an elder under the cool night sky. The air is thick with the sound of crickets, and the firelight flickers, casting long shadows on the earth. The elder's voice carries the weight of generations as they speak, the stories flowing like a river through time, unbroken by the chaos of the world around them. The act of storytelling in Aboriginal culture was more than just an exchange of words. It was a performance, a sacred ritual. Elders weren't just reciting stories, they were breathing life into them. Every movement, every gesture, every pause was deliberate, as though the very act of storytelling was part of the story itself. This made the stories not only powerful but dynamic, alive. Historians still argue whether Aboriginal storytelling had a formal structure or if it was free-flowing, a spontaneous act of connection. Some claim that there were strict rules regarding how stories should be told, passed down only to the initiated. Others argue that storytelling was more fluid, evolving with each telling, shaped by the environment and the storyteller's perspective. But regardless of the method, the key to survival lay in the hands of these elders. They held the stories close to their hearts, preserving them through song, dance, and sacred rituals. The Dreamtime stories weren't just to be remembered, they had to be experienced, lived. The stories came to life when they were shared, not simply recited. This practice ensured that Dreamtime could never truly die, no matter how much the world around it changed. When the colonizers arrived, they didn't understand this practice. They didn't understand the power of oral storytelling, the way it could shape the very air around it. They believed in written history, in documents, in books. But the stories of Dreamtime were far too ancient and far too fluid to be captured on paper. The written word could not contain the richness of these living stories. What's truly fascinating is that the role of the storyteller wasn't confined to a single person or group. It wasn't just the elders who carried the weight of Dreamtime. Young people were taught to tell stories too. They were trained, sometimes for years, in the art of storytelling. Every generation had a responsibility to carry the stories forward, ensuring they would be passed on with respect and care. This collective responsibility kept Dreamtime alive, no matter what was happening in the outside world. But let's pause here for a moment. You may be wondering, as the outsiders tried to impose their beliefs and systems, how did the Dreamtime stories continue to thrive despite the oppression? The answer lies in the fact that, unlike written history, these stories were alive, mutable, adaptable, and invincible in their own way. The key was always in the delivery. Dreamtime didn't rely on words alone, it relied on connection. It lived in the rhythm of the storyteller's voice, in the cadence of a dance, in the movement of the land itself. It was a deep, living energy that couldn't easily be stamped out. But as we've seen, it wasn't just the act of storytelling that kept Dreamtime alive. It was also the ability to absorb and adapt. As colonial powers pushed their own narratives, Dreamtime adjusted, blending and shifting to make sure it remained relevant. In this section, we see how the storytellers didn't just preserve the past, they helped mold the future. But how exactly did this adaptation play out when the pressure to conform became so great? How did the Dreamtime stories maintain their authenticity while adapting to a changing world? As the years went by, Aboriginal storytelling became a form of quiet resistance. The stories that had once been shared around campfires in the cool of the night were now passed in hushed tones, far from the ears of those who might seek to erase them. The storytellers knew the risks. They knew that telling the wrong story, in the wrong place, at the wrong time, could bring dangerous consequences. Yet, in the face of such pressure, these storytellers persisted. They became the keepers of a culture that refused to be drowned by the tides of colonization. Now, it's important to note that not all Aboriginal groups responded the same way to the onslaught of European influence. Some tribes chose to resist outright, to cling fiercely to the old ways, while others attempted to blend their traditions with the newcomers' beliefs. Historians still argue whether this blending was a survival tactic, a sign of cultural adaptability, or simply the result of inevitable cultural exchange. In either case, the Dreamtime stories didn't just fade into the background. They found ways to coexist with the new world around them. Take, for example, the fascinating relationship between Aboriginal people and Christianity. While many missionaries tried to stamp out traditional beliefs, some Aboriginal people began to integrate elements of Christianity into their stories. They started to see parallels between their creation myths and biblical tales, reinterpreting Dreamtime figures through the lens of Christian ideas. Some even began to draw comparisons between Baim, the Sky Father, and the Christian God. This was not an act of surrender, but a form of cultural adaptation, an attempt to make sense of the world in a way that could coexist with new beliefs without completely abandoning the old. But this process was not without its tensions. Many elders were deeply resistant to any modification of the sacred stories. For them, Dreamtime was not just a set of myths, it was the foundation of their identity. To alter it, even slightly, felt like betrayal. They understood the importance of cultural purity, but at the same time, they knew that survival depended on their ability to evolve with the changing world around them. This period of adaptation wasn't just about surviving the intrusion of colonial powers. It was also about navigating the internal struggle to maintain cultural integrity while remaining relevant in an increasingly modern world. Aboriginal communities began to negotiate their identity, balancing the old and the new in a way that preserved the essence of Dreamtime while acknowledging the existence of the foreign world they now had to share. Iatwith. And yet, even as the stories shifted and adapted, the essence of Dreamtime remained untouched. The land was still sacred. The spirits still walked among them. The rainbow serpent still carved its path through the earth, and Baim still watched over all. What the outsiders failed to understand, what they never could understand, was that Dreamtime wasn't just a belief system. It was the lens through which Aboriginal people viewed the entire world. It was woven into every leaf, every cloud, every sound on the wind. No matter how much the world outside changed, Dreamtime had already woven itself into the very fabric of the land. But here's the tricky part. How did these cultural adaptations play out when faced with an even greater threat, the erosion of the Dreamtime stories themselves, as younger generations grew up in a world dominated by Western values and modern technology? As time marched on and younger generations grew up in a rapidly changing world, the survival of Dreamtime stories was no longer guaranteed. With the advent of Western education, mass media, and technology, many Aboriginal children found themselves caught between two worlds. On one hand, they were expected to respect and uphold the traditional stories passed down by their elders. On the other hand, they were immersed in a world that often seemed to regard those same stories as outdated, unscientific, or irrelevant. You might think that these children, growing up with access to television, computers, and the internet, would have left Dreamtime behind. It would have been easy to imagine them abandoning their ancestral traditions in favor of the bright lights of modernity. But here's where it gets interesting. Dreamtime refused to die, even in the face of technology and modernization. Somehow, against all odds, it found its place in this new world. Historians still debate the role of urbanization in the preservation of Dreamtime. Some argue that the shift toward cities was the final blow to Aboriginal culture, leading to the disappearance of many traditions. Others believe that the modern world gave Dreamtime a new stage to perform on a wider audience, if you will. In the 21st century, Dreamtime stories began to make a comeback, not just in the remote deserts of Australia, but in schools, cultural centers, and even mainstream media. This cultural renaissance came at a time when Aboriginal people were pushing for recognition and rights, using their stories as a form of cultural empowerment. In fact, Dreamtime stories have become a vital part of Australia's national identity. For example, in schools, some Aboriginal elders now work to teach younger generations about the importance of their cultural heritage, bridging the gap between the old ways and the new. These stories are no longer confined to the firelight of small communities. They're being shared in classrooms, art galleries, and even on digital platforms. Take a moment to think about that. Imagine you're scrolling through your social media feed and you come across a beautifully animated video that brings the rainbow serpent to life, or perhaps a short film about Baim, the Sky Father, narrated by an Aboriginal elder. Dreamtime stories, once confined to oral tradition, have now entered the digital age, allowing them to reach not only young Aboriginal people, but also a global audience. This is something that the storytellers of the past could never have imagined, yet it's happening. But there's a deeper question here. Are these stories truly preserved in their original form when they are shared in such a globalized, digital context? Does the power of Dreamtime get diluted in the process, or is it simply evolving into something new, while still retaining its core essence? Historians argue that the digital Dreamtime might lose some of its potency by moving away from its traditional forms. But for many Aboriginal people, this is a way to ensure that their culture remains alive and relevant in an increasingly interconnected world. In the end, the story of Dreamtime is not one of survival alone. It's a story of adaptation and reinvention. It's proof that some stories, when rooted deeply in the land and the people, cannot be erased, no matter how much time or technology tries to change them. Dreamtime has become something far more than a series of myths. It's a living, breathing force, still present in the heart of every Aboriginal person and in every corner of Australia. But now we arrive at the final question. What does the continued survival of Dreamtime mean for us today? How can we, in our modern world, apply the lessons and wisdom of these ancient stories to our lives? As we reach the end of this journey, let's reflect on something important. What can Dreamtime offer us today? What can we, as modern individuals in a world dominated by technology, fast-paced lives, and constant distractions, learn from the ancient stories of the Aboriginal people? Dreamtime is not just a collection of myths or fairy tales. It's a framework, a way of understanding the world and our place within it. The stories, steeped in spirituality and connection to the earth, teach us how to live in harmony with nature, respect the cycles of life, and understand that our actions have a ripple effect on everything around us. This is something that's often lost in the modern world, where we're so caught up in the rush to succeed, to climb the social ladder, or to simply get by. Think for a moment about the stories of the rainbow serpent and Baim. They aren't just figures, they are symbols of balance and creation. The rainbow serpent, who carved out the rivers, is a reminder that life is cyclical. Just as water flows, so too does life ebb and change. Baim, the Sky Father, is a symbol of wisdom, guardianship, and care for the land. His presence in the stories is a reminder that we all have a role to play in the world around us, a responsibility to protect and nurture the earth. These are the kinds of values that Dreamtime stories have always carried, and they continue to resonate today. As we move further into the 21st century, it's easy to forget the ancient wisdom embedded in the land beneath our feet. We live in cities made of concrete, steel, and glass, vast landscapes that sometimes seem so disconnected from the earth. But Dreamtime stories remind us of a deeper truth. We are not separate from nature, but intricately connected to it. The health of the land, the rivers, and the animals reflects the health of our culture and our spirit. The stories of Dreamtime remind us that if we damage the earth, we are ultimately damaging ourselves. So, in a world where technology often takes the forefront, where we're more likely to scroll through social media than take a walk through the forest, Dreamtime calls us to pause, to reflect, and to reconnect with the earth. It encourages us to slow down and listen to the whispers of the land. What if we all took a moment every day to step outside, to breathe deeply, and to remind ourselves that we are part of something much greater than our individual lives? And there's more. The stories also teach us about resilience and adaptability. Aboriginal people have faced unimaginable hardship, from disease and violence to cultural erasure, and yet their stories have survived. They adapted, evolved, and found new ways to thrive, and this resilience is a lesson we can all carry with us. No matter how hard life gets, no matter how many obstacles we face, there is always a way forward, always a path to survival and renewal. Dreamtime is not just a testament to survival, it's a blueprint for thriving in the face of adversity. As we bring this journey to a close, I want to leave you with a thought. Dreamtime is not just something that belongs to the past, it belongs to the present and the future as well. It is a living, breathing part of our shared human experience. The lessons of Dreamtime, of connection, resilience, and harmony with the earth, are just as relevant today as they were thousands of years ago. So, the next time you find yourself feeling lost or disconnected, remember the stories of the land, the creatures, and the spirits. Remember that you are part of something ancient, something powerful, and something that will always endure. Now, take a deep breath, let the quiet settle around you, and know that Dreamtime continues, always.